As an artist, you need to express yourself. Now we were more than just daredevils. Now we were telling a story. A love story.
Jumping into this, how much would it cost because you couldn't pay me any amount of money to do what they do. Literally, you could say you'll get $1 billion, doesn't matter. What's your price to actually do some of the things that they do?
I mean, we did some of the things they do. And I was an amateur rooftopper myself when I was in my teens and 20s, but I say amateur in all caps because I didn't do anything close to what these guys do. And during this shoot, we went up to a lot of these buildings. We went to higher buildings that I'd never been to, but we had a safety protocol, actually, which we wrote out and agreed to with their families, which said that we could trespass into the buildings with our big cameras, but when we got to a flat roof, we had to stop there. And then when the spire started or when the cranes started, then Ivan and Angela would shoot themselves from there so that we didn't distract them because they have a telepathy between the two of them. So I wouldn't do the spires and I wouldn't do the cranes, and I have more fear of heights every year that I get older. But it was worth it. It was a thrill.
I read that you, as a teenager, did some of this. What's like the highest or the craziest thing you personally did? I'm just curious.
I mean, these guys are topping 2,000-foot buildings. I was probably going up a few hundred feet. For me, it wasn't about the competition to beat other people to the highest, to be the first one in the highest building. I didn't even know other people were doing it. I didn't even know it had a name. We just called it trespassing. To me, it was a way of sort of escaping the spaces of the culture bubble where they tell you how to behave and you're expected to conform. And these autonomous spaces under the city or on top of it where you can face your fear on your own terms. You can decide who you want to be on your own terms. That autonomy, that was what was exciting for me. And it wasn't until years later when I sort of took off the proverbial balaclava and became a journalist that I realized other people were doing this. And I was like, well, I have to find a story in that space that resonates as deeply as my experience. And that took 15 years. I was watching the rise of this phenomena, waiting for a story that wasn't just daredevils doing crazy shit for likes, but actually an artist. And about 2015, 2016, Angela burst on the scene. Her influences were not the Kardashians. It was like, Basquiat and Warhol, and she genuinely was trying to make art, and she was doing something really different. And she was saying she wanted to be like the guys, she wanted to have a feminine lens. So I was intrigued. Called her up. She told me she was raised in a traveling circus. I was even more intrigued. And then she introduced me to Ivan, and they presented each other. I mean, he's the most famous rooftopper in Russia at that time already. And they presented each other as competitors, as rivals, but you can sense bubbling under the surface. There was a flirtation, there was a courtship. And that's where that seed got planted of, oh my God, could we do a love story on top of the world? Like, could we use extreme climbing as a metaphor for romantic trust? And we shot a little sizzle, and Tamir Ardon, who's here from XYZ Films, my old friend, and Library Films, took a massive leap of faith in believing in me and believing in this project and financing it. And that was, another 3.5 years of production from that point forward, where, with Cinema Verite, you don't know where your finish line is. You don't know where your climax is. And so we followed the story through all these twists and turns, and sometimes it said it wanted to be more political, sometimes the story said it wanted to be a heist or wanted to be a thriller, but what we stuck to, like our North Star throughout this process, is no, we decided this is a love story. This is not just going to be a film about the fear of falling from heights, this is going to be a film about the fear of falling in love.
Well, one of the things, though, and I give credit to everyone who financed, is that you really don't know if, God forbid, something bad could happen when you're filming. So did you ever have like a conversation with people about what if?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, we said up front, don't do anything for the cameras that you wouldn't do otherwise. But having done this with other films, like, that subconsciously there's still a motivation to impress the filmmakers or to do something that you think the camera might want so that improves your film. And so we had to constantly remind them that, the way I always put it is that it doesn't matter if you fail at Merdeka or you fail at whatever climb you're trying to do. The external journey of whether or not you get the highest building isn't going to be ultimately the suspense of the movie. It's going to be the internal journey, whether or not you choose to trust each other. If you fail at Merdeka, but by the end you've chosen to trust Ivan, in the case of Angela, the audience will be satisfied, right? And so we were encouraging them to look inward rather than to push themselves on the outward. And they did have the little accident where Angela hurt herself, which we saw in the film, but otherwise we're so grateful that nobody on the crew or Angela and Ivan were hurt worse than that.
So everyone in this audience and earlier today myself watched this in IMAX. And it is incredible in IMAX, especially because of the locations where this film takes place. It's only going to be in IMAX for a week, but what does it mean to you to actually have this in IMAX and have people experience it?
Oh, it's a dream come true. I mean, these things start as a harebrained scheme in my little head, which, the highest risk, who knows, project you could possibly pitch to people. And everybody that worked on it turned down more stable jobs to do this. And then the world believes in it, and now all these people are working on it, and it's on the biggest screens. I remember at Sundance when we premiered the film, it was a huge relief because okay, people kind of seem to like this thing. And then we got a bunch of interest from distributors, and I was like, wow, that's good. And then we heard IMAX, and I was like, oh my God, I haven't even imagined IMAX. And so to play with IMAX and then to have Netflix, bring it out as the biggest streamer in the world, it's a dream come true.
Well, one of the things about, what was it like doing the conversion, if you will, or I'm not sure how involved you were with it, but obviously they filmed this sometimes with GoPros and whatever. How did that work in terms of bringing it to IMAX?
Yeah, it was a lot of work. It was 9 different camera formats. Some of them, the C300s were the main cameras that we used, and those convert fairly well because they're shot very high resolution. But yeah, particularly the night vision, those body cams, and we got the nicest night vision cameras we could get from law enforcement, the highest grade, but they're pretty low quality. So yeah, we did add grain, worked with grain structures, cinematic grain structures, worked with color, to try to bring that all together into a palette, and we were pleasantly surprised that it does blow up. It works.
I'm fascinated by the editing process because it's where it all comes together. With a film like this, I would imagine you have a ton of footage. So talk a little bit about how daunting it was when you finally started editing.
Yeah, we had 60 plus hours of archival that they shot themselves, and then we had over 200 hours of footage that we shot. Which is great. We had a 9.5 month edit, so we had time to go through everything and do a lot of trial and error. And a lot of the time we were editing while we were shooting as well, because we were figuring out the story in the edit. I mean, one of the challenges we came up against is that the first act, roughly the first 30 minutes, tells mostly their backstory, right? And the way that they were shooting was all for short form. So it was, just focused on that perfect polished pose at the end, and not the stuff that we wanted, which was left on the edit room floor, all of the awkward moments, the strategizing, the bickering, the fights, the fear. And so we didn't have a lot of scenes to work with. In the first edit of the film, the first 30 minutes was just montage mania. It was just bombastic. And then there was this pivot where you move into our footage and the pace slowed down, and we were saying, well, maybe that works, right? Because in the middle of a romance, like the early stages of the pursuit are very fast and wild and frenetic, but it didn't. It was too big of a aesthetic shift, and so we went back into the first 30 minutes and brought scenes in. Luckily, there was a film crew that was with Ivan and Angela off and on for about 10 months in the first year of their courtship before we even started. And so like the scenes when they're texting each other and the scene where they meet for the first time, that's all real footage of them actually texting and meeting for the first time. So we did have some stuff to let it breathe in the first 30 minutes. And then we went into the rest of the film, we started adding more montage so that hopefully it evolves the way a romance would evolve.
How long was your first cut that you were like, there's no way it's getting shorter than this?
I pride myself on coming in with pretty slim cuts. I think we probably had a 2.5 hour cut at some point, but it wasn't much bigger than that. The biggest challenge was how do you get this insane backstory of them traveling the world together to end by the end of the first act so that we could launch into our main mission. We stretched out Act 1 a little bit, but I think we got most of it in there.
What did you learn from any early friends and family screenings that impacted the finished film?
One of the big surprises is that we thought for a long time that the lesson of the movie, that the arc was that in every relationship you need to balance each other out and that each person in the relationship plays a role. Like in this case, the trapeze metaphor, you have the flyer and you've got the catcher, and the flyer leads the couple into the skies, into the dreams, and the catcher brings them back down to earth and grounds them and is their safety mechanism. And we thought, okay, yeah, that's a profound commentary on relationships. But then Rebecca didn't really work that way, right? Because Angela takes the lead, and then Angela pulls back, and they're switching roles all over the place. And we're like, well, wait a minute. Maybe that's actually a more insightful commentary on romantic trust, that in any relationship, you both need to know when to be the flyer and when to be the catcher, when to switch roles, when to be the rock and when to be the star.
What was the last thing that you cut out before picture locking, if you can remember, and why?
You remember, Tamir? We had a number of deaths. There's a scene early on where it's important to us that we did right up front make sure that anybody who even considered copycatting this knew that this was incredibly difficult, deadly, and that these are trained acrobats and gymnasts, and this is another level of experience. Not anybody could just go do it. So we wanted to get some of those YouTube videos of people dying in there, but it's hard, really hard to watch that stuff. So we ended up doing a cut that had a number more of those deaths in there, and towards the end, we wanted to bring them out, but we also wanted to make sure that nobody would finish watching this movie and think they were going to go climb a roof. So we struck a balance there. Yeah,
I was actually going to ask you about that, because I think there's, and again, I could be wrong, like 2 or 3 shots in the movie that show people falling. Was it tough to get the rights to stuff like that? And you know what I mean? Like, putting that stuff in is really hard.
Yeah, no, luckily those are all, out there in the world and have been seen millions of times. So I don't remember if we licensed those or if they were fair use, but no, in terms of licensing, the real challenge is that we were never going to get location releases from any of these buildings. And luckily, that was a conversation that Tamir and I had really early on, like years ago. We know this is not going to be something we're ever going to get, and there's going to be some liability there. And, hopefully we can get through it without any legal issues, safety issues first, legal issues second, and then maybe a distributor will be willing to take it on anyway. And luckily all those things worked out. And Netflix and IMAX have joined the leap of faith that XYZ started.
Yeah, I was curious about that with, is there any sort of like legality now that Netflix has it? Can they use all the footage? Like, how is it gray area? And you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think we're good. We'll see. It's always the answer.
Sure.
With any film, really. But the films I work on that I feel like we're really buttoned up, sometimes people start calling and you're like, what, really? And then films that you're not, nobody calls. So we'll have to play this one out. But the main thing is that Angela and Ivan can't travel to some of these places. Yeah. Like, they're not going back to Malaysia. I don't know if it's a good idea for them to go back to France. But we were able to, through some extensive efforts, including Tamir reaching out to his law enforcement FBI contacts and working with the governor of Utah, we were able to get them a very rare work visa. Russians who break the law for a living is a tough visa to get right now. And we were able to get them a work visa for 2 years so they can live and work in the United States. They were able to come to Sundance. They came to Tribeca, which was our IMAX premiere at I think North America's biggest IMAX screen. So they've had a chance to interact with audiences, and hopefully we can get them more work opportunities where they don't have to risk their lives if they don't want to.
Yeah, I am curious if they are still doing what they used to do, or are they sort of entered a new phase of their lives?
They're evolving. I mean, she does a lot of painting, and he makes music, and I think the roofs are their love. That's the essence for them, and it'll always be a part of what they do, but they want to be able to explore more imaginative ways of incorporating rooftoping into other forms of art rather than having to risk their life to make ends meet. So they love the idea of making films now after watching this, both being in front of and behind the camera, and it's been really inspiring to work with them. I don't think I've ever had this kind of a collaborative relationship with my subjects on a project before, because they had to teach us how to rooftop and get away with it, and we had to teach them how to make a long-form film because they'd only done these tiny little, short-form nuggets. And They picked it up really quickly. I mean, Ivan's an incredible drone operator, as you saw in the film. Most of the drone work is Ivan. He'll get to the top of a spire, he'll program the drone, put the remote in his pocket, lift her up or do a dangle with her. The drone will circle around, he'll bring it back, reprogram it, get a second take, get a third take, and bring us down all this amazing footage to work with. And Angela was just really quick to understand what a scene in a long-form doc is, that you need to get different angles, that we're looking for the vulnerable stuff. And over time, we said to them, what makes you relatable, because you lead a very extraordinary life here that I don't think many people will be able to identify with, but what makes you relatable, the universal stuff, is that you quibble in your relationship. We could all relate to that, and that you're afraid when you're up there, right? We've done a number of projects where these extreme athletes are like, I've made terms with death, and if I die doing what I love, I'm okay with. Not these guys, they don't want to die. And I can't identify with Alex Honnold in Free Solo where they do a brain scan. He doesn't have the same fear center that the rest of us do. I just don't get it. But afraid to die in one of these buildings, yeah, I could put myself in those shoes. And so we kept saying to them, the more you're willing to share of that, including Angela's panic attack, the more we think audiences will understand where you're at, see themselves in your shoes and be able to root for you. And so they did start really embracing those vulnerable moments, including their fights, and she did a great job capturing that for us.
I wanted to touch on some of the drone shots because they're fantastic. What a lot of people are going to forget is he has to carry all that stuff up. You know what I mean? And so how big is the drone and that kind of stuff? How much does it weigh? Because the footage is incredible.
Yeah, the drone that he went up to Merdeka with is a smaller drone. We tested the capacity of that on that big pull-out shot when they first get to the top of the building. Unfortunately, our drones wouldn't go high enough. Even we were on a roof nearby, and we couldn't get our drones high enough to capture that shot of them. We did go closer to before their climb on Merdeka, we went closer with our own custom-built DVI drone. It's a first-person FPV. And that was where you get that shot to the top that dips and falls all the way down the side of the building. That was a local drone operator who built his own drone, who did not want to be credited in the film. But one of the things we did, which is not in the movie, is when they were done shooting whatever the pose was on top of these buildings, they would tape their cards, their media cards from various different formats of cameras, right? They were rigged with all sorts of cameras. They would tape them to the drone, and then they would fly the drone down to us on some other roof, so that just in case they got caught on the way down, they wouldn't lose the footage. But as we know, nobody questions you on the way out, so we had no problems.
Yeah, I learned so much watching this, like basically how to sneak out of a building. You know what I mean? So what is it like when you were showing it to them for the first time? Did they watch it when it was done? Were they involved in the edit? And did they have any sort of feedback and say, hey, everything's great, but this one scene, can we lose it?
Yeah, we kept telling them, watch a long form doc. Like, they'd never seen an hour and 20-minute or hour 30-minute documentary before. We said, watch Free Solo, watch Man on Wire. These are good references. It'll give you a sense of what we're going for here. And they say, yeah, we'll watch it. But they just never did. I think they felt like an hour and 40 minutes with a documentary, that's just the most boring thing they could imagine. So the first time they watched a feature-length doc was watching the rough cut of Skywalkers, and we're like, they're going to be so bored. And we watched them very carefully, hawk-eyed throughout the film. There was not a lot to read there, poker-faced. And at the end of the film, there was a sort of pregnant pause, and Ivan rubbed his chin, and he's like, I do have one note, and I hope it's okay if I share it with you. I was like, oh no, here goes. He said, there's this scene where I'm playing a pickup soccer match in Thailand, and I scored like 5 goals in that match, and you're showing some other guy score a goal. And I was like, if that's the extent of your notes, Ivan, we could definitely put that goal in, and we're going to be fine. So yes, since then, they've watched a lot of feature documentaries. We've converted them.
That's right. That's the note.
That was the note.
So one thing I'm curious about is the title, Skywalkers. The first time I heard the title, I'm like, wait, is this like a play on Star Wars, Skywalkers? Did you have any sort of, this is me because I'm a fucking nerd, did you have any sort of play on that? Like, did anyone say a different title, or was it always this title?
The title stuck. We didn't want it to be about rooftoping because we feel that gets associated with the daredevil, influencer as opposed to the artist doing something original and unique. And Skywalkers is a term they like because it defines what they do separate from the rest of the phenomena. And so we were aware that there are Skywalkers in another major genre of films in the world, and thought, hell, maybe that'll help get people into seats.
Honestly, it might. You know what I mean? One of the things about this project, though, is it takes place over so many years. So as a filmmaker, can you sort of talk about what it's like working on something for this long while you're also doing other projects at the same time?
Yeah, in some ways it's my preference. I mean, if you can find finance that's willing to wait with you until a natural climax, a natural finish line occurs, that's very rare. You know, so often these things get reverse engineered, and I've spent, you know, almost 2 decades mostly making commissions for streamers where we know our schedule from the beginning, and if it's verite and you're tracking, you're following somebody in their life and their life doesn't get to a climax, then you have to figure it out. But to be with independent finance where you can wait and decide sometimes maybe there's not a lot of activity going on in their lives, and so we'll pull back and save some of the budget and make sure our burn rate isn't too high. And then there's other times where you're like, absolutely, we're going to be all over this. Like, you know, COVID breaks out, they lose their followers, then the war, they have to leave the country, maybe say goodbye to their family. Like, we're all over that. And so it allows you the freedom to pick and choose where someone's life is at a turning point and then build a film about those life's turning points, as opposed to milking something or forcing something that maybe doesn't have the authenticity.
I am curious what happened. So COVID happens, the world shuts down. This is a project that you're working on, and their lives. What was it like actually during that year where everything was bad, and you know what I mean, and you don't know what's about to happen?
Yeah, so co-director and producer on the film, Maria Bukhanina, is Russian-American, and she was able to be in Russia and Moscow during COVID and during the invasion of Ukraine when the rest of us either couldn't be there or it would be very dangerous for us to be there. And she basically lived and traveled with the Skywalkers over the better part of 2.5 years. And it was incredibly helpful because they trusted her. They looked up to her as someone that, you know, they respected her opinion and invited us into their creative process. So it actually was an opportunity to deepen the trust in our relationship with them. You know, we talk about, well, Angela talks about the flyer and the catcher in the film, and she's referring to her and Ivan, but we also talk about ourselves in relation to them as flyer and catcher, and we felt like we were very much the catcher throughout this relationship. They would push further. We would often try to reel them back in and say, that's a crazy idea. Sometimes we would get them a little more sane. Sometimes they would get us a little higher risk, and that push and pull, that tug of war is what got us through.
There are some fantastic shots in this movie. What is the thing that you're most looking forward to people in IMAX seeing and then people on Netflix seeing?
That moment in the climax where, this is a spoiler for anyone watching at home, they pull off the impossible. People have applauded in every screening that we've gone to at that moment. I've never made a film where people applaud during the movie before. I'm really thrilled to see people's reaction to the spectacle, to the vertigo, especially in IMAX. I mean, watching people's body language is often more like a sporting event than a movie, and that's exciting. But ultimately underneath it, you know, what's the most rewarding is when people come up to us after the film and talk about how they reflected on their own romance as a result of watching the film, that they've decided they're going to trust their partner more. You know, most of the stories we have access to, it feels like, through news, through docs, through everything, are about morally compromised individuals, morally compromised stories, betrayals, abandonment, deceit. So hopefully people will watch Skywalkers and maybe lean a little bit more into trusting others again, especially when it feels like the hardest thing to do. That's what we need to unite across our differences.
Yeah, that's the thing that one of the things I took away from the film was that if they don't have complete trust, it's game over. You know, and they talk about it on the rooftop. You know, like I don't. Well, you could.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's you know, there is danger in love, right? It crushes our hearts and our self-esteem, and it breaks us. And so here, that danger is literal. It's material. Like, it's life or death. And so that just felt like such an interesting palette to work with, that you could explore these dynamics that all of us can relate to, but in a tangible way.
I looked, and you're basically always working on a number of things. So I'm just curious, how many things are you working on right now?
13.
Is that a real number?
Yes, but there are various different stages. Some of them will take years. I would say 3 of those are real right now in the moment.
Okay, well, please do tell.
No way. No. We will tell when we're ready, yeah.
Yeah, I got it. Well, one of my jobs is actually, to find out what other people are working on. You don't want to tease any of them?
Skywalkers, a war story.
I want to make sure before I run it, because we're just about at the end, if anyone has an individual question. Otherwise, I'm going to say,
Yeah, I wanted to ask, first, it's a little bit remind me of film with Gordon Levine when he was played the guy who did in real life. He was in France. He was like
You mean Man on Wire?
No, she means the Gordon Levitt, Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Yeah,
oh, yeah.
It was called The Walk.
Yeah. And it was so interesting. In some moments, it was similar. Another question is like, how it was hard to film everything during the war, because I have Russian passport and stuff like this. I just can't imagine to be like in Moscow in this moment and everything, how it was doing during the war.
Yeah, I mean, the Man on Wire was definitely one of our references, and that film lent itself to a scripted version, The Walk, because there wasn't footage of Philippe doing his tightrope walk. It was only seen from the street, and so to make that immersive, you needed the scripted version, and that was part of what we were excited about here, is that we could bring you up to the stunt, and you could be immersed in that and feel like maybe you were there. That's not to say we aren't pursuing a scripted version. We're in the process. But the other part of your question was, how hard is it to shoot during the war? We had a lot of conversations about how much or how little to have the war factor into the story. Obviously, it deeply impacts their life, but then it also deeply impacts the lives of tens of thousands of people who are dying and losing their homes and suffering. And so we wanted to make sure it was clear how it impacted Ivan and Angela, but we made a decision that it wasn't going to be something we discussed beyond how it informed the forward movement of their story. There was an incident during that time when one of their friends did a political act on a roof and painted a Ukrainian flag on one of the Kremlin buildings and was able to get out of the country, and Ivan and Angela had to do lie detector tests, and they were interrogated, and law enforcement thought they were involved. So it impacted their lives in many ways beyond what the film shows. But again, there's so many genres this film could have gone into, and we really just kept bringing it back to that North Star of, this is a love story, let's involve these plot points insofar as they inform the love story.
Hence the reason it could have been 2.5 hours. One more question. Here we go.
So, this is acquired by Netflix, which is obviously a global streamo everywhere. You mentioned earlier the kind of the potential problems of not being able to secure rights to the locations. Do you know if Netflix is having any problems, or just straight up just not going to stream it in some of the places they climb the buildings is, such as Malaysia, most notably?
Yeah, it's a good question. As of this moment, Netflix's plan is to release it worldwide on all their platforms on the 19th of July. So we've not heard anything about them reducing their distribution of it for legal concerns.
I would also say, and I could be wrong, but I think Malaysia, it's good publicity for the tower. I think it is, but obviously maybe I'm, wrong.
We have to ask the Prime Minister about that. I'm not in a place to speak to that one yet.
I'm just thinking about Zoolander. Anyway, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed the film tonight, please use social media to share the word. And otherwise, Jeff, thank you so much for doing this Q&A. Oh, yeah, for sure.
So we're at Skywalkers Love Story on Instagram and at Jeff Zimbalist on Instagram, and there'll be lots of assets there if you wouldn't mind reposting and spreading the word. That would be huge. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all. Have a great night.